On October 15, 2024, Alien Romulus finished its theatrical run in China with a domestic box office of $109 million, contributing to a global total of $350 million. Its largest market was the United States, which brought in just over $100 million, followed closely by China. Considering the lukewarm reception of foreign blockbusters in recent years, this is already a respectable performance, though context matters. A decade ago, a Hollywood production of this scale, especially with a major IP like Alien, would easily have grossed several $100 million. By comparison, this $350 million result, against its $80 million production cost, barely breaks even. It's neither a flop nor a success. When compared to Hollywood sci-fi blockbusters that once dominated the Chinese box office, such as Transformers, Avatar or Venom, the performance is underwhelming. Even more striking is that another major sci-fi IP, Transformers Rise of the Beasts, failed to break $30 million after a month of release. In response, Variety, a Hollywood magazine, lamented that Chinese audiences seem tired of the formulaic nature of American sci-fi films and the Tom Cruise-style individualism. But this issue isn't just limited to Chinese audiences. Even American audiences are becoming increasingly disillusioned with Hollywood sci-fi. The most telling evidence is that both the box office and critical reception of Hollywood sci-fi films have been in decline, far from the glory days of 2 or 3 decades ago when these films dominated global cinema. Why has the once mighty American sci-fi genre fallen to such a state, and what lessons can China's sci-fi industry draw from this trajectory? Then again, given the state of films like No. 749 Bureau, perhaps it's best not to speak too highly of the Chinese sci-fi scene. One could argue that Liu Cixin has elevated Chinese sci-fi to heights it doesn't yet deserve. Speaking of American sci-fi films, I grew up watching many classics that have earned their place in film history. Movies like The Terminator, 2001, A Space Odyssey, Starship Troopers and Dune. These films were an integral part of my childhood and coming-of-age experience. Their quality was indisputably top-notch. Even today, Terminator 2 stands as a top-tier masterpiece. This formed a stereotype in my mind as a child. Americans, living in a developed and prosperous nation with creative freedom and a strong economy, naturally had the imagination and resources to produce great films. I wasn't alone in thinking this. For years, a common argument on forums went something like this. Look at the Americans. They're making movies about the future, while all we can make are historical costume dramas. That's why China has no future. If you've spent any time online in those years, you've likely encountered this perspective. Aspiring sci-fi creators were often ridiculed as naive, foolish and idealistic, but this argument is flawed. The concept of sci-fi literature has little to do with America initially. The first widely recognized sci-fi novel is Frankenstein, written by British author Mary Shelley in 1818. The genre was popularized by authors like Jules Verne of France and H.G. Wells of Britain. Verne's works, such as 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, The Mysterious Island and Journey to the Centre of the Earth, and Wells's The Time Machine, The Invisible Man and The Island of Dr. Moreau, laid the foundation for sci-fi literature and inspired generations of writers. These works even influenced human history to some extent. The world's first sci-fi film, A Trip to the Moon, was directed by French filmmaker Georges Méliès, drawing inspiration from Verne's From the Earth to the Moon and Wells' The First Men in the Moon. Germany also played a significant role during the Second Industrial Revolution. German author Kurt Laswitz, known as the father of German sci-fi, wrote On Two Planets, a foundational work about human-alien interactions. Beyond France, Britain and Germany, other European nations also produced many outstanding sci-fi writers during this era. Their works, even by today's standards, are rich in creativity and timeless. They imagined futures where humanity ventured beyond Earth to the stars, delved into the planet's core, or plunged into the ocean's depths to explore the unknown and establish contact with extraterrestrial civilizations. This period marked the first golden age of sci-fi literature. At the time, the Second Industrial Revolution was in full swing, fueling explosive growth across the Western world. This era's optimism about the future naturally inspired a proliferation of sci-fi literature in books, magazines, films and radio. The United States, as the world's leading industrial power, quickly followed Europe's lead and began producing its own sci-fi works. For Americans, sci-fi was essentially an imported concept. It's worth noting that while America now criticizes other nations for intellectual property violations, it was once the quintessential copycat nation. In its early years, the United States advanced its development through rampant theft and imitation of European technologies. For example, Alexander Hamilton, the first Secretary of the Treasury, argued in his report on the subject of manufactures that the European ban on exporting advanced technologies was selfish and exclusive. He even advocated for rewarding individuals who could bring valuable technological improvements and secrets to the United States. Doron Ben-Attar, a history professor at Fordham University, lamented that the American Industrial Revolution was born from stolen intellectual property. A classic example of this is the Springfield M1903 rifle, which was a blatant imitation of Germany's Mauser rifle. The German company even sued the US and won compensation. This shows that, as a capitalist nation, the US does compensate when held accountable. If science and technology were not spared, America's piracy of European literature was even more aggressive. American piracy of European books was so rampant that even the renowned British author Charles Dickens was significantly affected. Dickens protested against the United States copyright violations, but the US government turned a deaf ear. For over a century, piracy of foreign works was legal in the United States. Dickens was not the only victim. Authors across Europe were affected, including those writing science fiction. To American workers and discontented urban merchants during the era of rapid urbanization, Europe's imaginative science fiction opened a new world of possibilities, captivating readers. It wasn't long before science fiction, like other literary genres, took root and flourished in America. With the advent of cheap pulp magazines in 1896, due to publisher Frank A. Munsey, this new mode of distribution quickly spread across the United States and beyond. American science fiction began to rise alongside other forms of literature, with works like The Queen of Atlantis by Frank Aubrey, A Round Trip to the Year 2000 by William Wallace Cook, and A Princess of Mars by Edgar Rice Burroughs gaining global recognition. However, European audiences were not impressed. For example, A Princess of Mars, one of the most popular science fiction stories in America, faced ridicule in Europe. The story follows John Carter, a Civil War veteran who is transported to Mars. There he encounters a dying civilization, 4 armed green barbarians and Princess Dejah Thoris. The story concludes with Carter ruling over Mars and marrying the princess. While the story enjoyed widespread popularity in the US, even spawning film adaptations, including a 2009 Hollywood remake, European critics dismissed it. They derided the lack of imagination, pointing out that despite interplanetary travel, the story still relied on single-shot rifles, small-scale skirmishes involving a few hundred humans and alien civilizations that inexplicably lived in tribal structures. Europeans concluded that American creativity was stuck in the frontier era. Their imagination seemed limited to brawling with savages, placing undue faith in family, and dreaming of themselves as saviors, all steeped in religious undertones. Ironically, this critique proved prophetic, as it defined much of American science fiction for decades to come. That said, America has made significant contributions to science fiction. In 1927, Hugo Gernsback, editor of Amazing Stories magazine, coined the term scientifiction to define the genre. This helped establish science fiction as a distinct literary form. Gernsback's contributions earned him posthumous recognition, with the prestigious Hugo Awards named in his honor. Later, John W. Campbell nurtured numerous talented science fiction writers, significantly advancing the genre in America. Science fiction shares a common core with Chinese fantasy literature. For instance, Journey to the West, the most famous Chinese fantasy tale, and the Western science fiction work Planet of the Apes both use humanoid monkeys as central characters. In China, the Monkey King, Sun Wukong, is a beloved national figure. For the United States, its true science fiction boom began during the Cold War. To outpace each other technologically, Both the US and the Soviet Union heavily invested in science and technology. This era of rapid development and innovation fostered a relentless forward momentum in society, fueling a golden age of science fiction. This period saw humanity's first artificial satellite, the first space station, the first moon landing, and the first space probes. Optimism about humanity's future soared, with many believing lunar bases and Mars colonies were just around the corner. These aspirations paralleled a surge in science fiction films which captured the zeitgeist. The big three of science fiction, Isaac Asimov, Robert Heinlein and Arthur C. Clarke, dominated this era. Their prolific work shaped the golden age of science fiction and inspired countless writers, including China's Liu Cixin. This golden age also provided material for iconic sci-fi films. For instance, 2001: A Space Odyssey, released in 1968, was a groundbreaking milestone, while Star Wars, released in 1977, showcased the peak of American filmmaking. However, the Cold War's looming threat of annihilation cast a shadow over humanity's future, leading to dystopian classics like Escape from New York and Escape from LA. This period also gave rise to the post-apocalyptic subgenre, reflecting fears of a bleak future. While the quality of science fiction films varied, their connection to the golden age of literature was undeniable. Just as this golden age showed no signs of waning, the Cold War abruptly ended. As the Soviet Union dissolved, so too did the era of US-Soviet competition. In scientific circles there's an old saying, "If you don't miss the Cold War, you're not a real scientist." This sentiment reflects the unparalleled drive for innovation during that era, which now feels like a bygone age. Funding for scientific research decreased over time, and the status of scientists began to decline. This marked the end of the golden age of science fiction literature. However, the inertia of the era ensured that film festivals still embraced science fiction as a genre. With the rise of industrial light and magic in Hollywood, the US successfully introduced the concept of three highs to sci-fi movies: high technology, high investment, and high quality. This approach was a game-changer for the global film industry, creating a disparity that other countries struggled to match. Movies like Terminator, E.T. and Jurassic Park featured groundbreaking visual effects that had never been seen before. By this point, the American sci-fi industry had evolved into a complete ecosystem, spanning magazines, books, films, games and toys. No other country, not almost none, but absolutely none, could compete with Hollywood in this domain. During the 1990s and early 21st century, Hollywood leveraged its technical expertise to produce numerous classic sci-fi films. However, history played a cruel joke. The United States became the victim of its own success. Without a worthy competitor and against the backdrop of waning global interest in sci-fi literature, America's sci-fi scene gradually lost the relentless, no-holds-barred spirit that once defined it. In its place emerged a peculiar mix of religious overtones and a small-minded approach reminiscent of playing house. One of the starkest differences between past and present American sci-fi films is their approach to science. Earlier works, as emphasized by figures like John Campbell, were deeply rooted in scientific principles. Today's films, however, have become an eclectic mix of genres. Science blends with fantasy, fantasy with religion, religion with feudalistic undertones, and all of it is wrapped in a layer of pettiness. Even a celebrated film like Interstellar couldn't entirely escape this trend. The acting was phenomenal, the visual effects stunning, and the scientific foundations solid, bolstered by Nobel Prize-winning physicist Kip Thorne. Yet, as the story unfolds, there's an unsettling sense of misalignment. Or, to put it bluntly, pettiness. Humanity is on the brink of extinction, and the protagonist, burdened with the fate of mankind, tearfully abandons his responsibilities to return to Earth. All in the name of humanity. Such scenes would have been unthinkable during the golden age of sci-fi. Back then, the genre celebrated humanity's courage, willpower, intellect, strength, and a bit of luck in the face of adversity. The ethos was clear: press forward at all costs. Tears and sentimentality weren't tools to save humanity. Resolve and ingenuity were. This shift is why I'm drawn to the Warhammer 40k universe and why I enjoy referencing it in videos. It's one of the few remaining franchises that retains the flavor of the golden age of sci-fi. In this grimdark space opera, humanity is frail, cowardly, selfish and ignorant, clinging to idol worship in an unimaginably dark and terrifying era. Faced with invincible enemies, humanity refuses to yield and continues to fight, however futile it may seem. Even the iconic Lion of Japan's Showa era rebukes his successors with biting words. "What is that expression on your face? Are those tears? Do you think shedding tears will save Earth?" Imagine a scene in the wandering Earth extinction, and the leader of the astronaut corps tearfully declares, "Anyone over 50 who wants to go home can leave now." Such an absurd moment would leave audiences utterly baffled. Yet this is precisely the atmosphere that permeates many modern American sci-fi films. Adding to this is a recurring criticism from Europeans. For over a century, they've joked that Americans lack imagination. Unfortunately, this observation has aged all too well. Take Avatar, for instance. Visually stunning, but narratively it's essentially Pocahontas in space, a romance between a white American and an indigenous woman, set against the backdrop of interplanetary colonization. Scratch beneath the surface and you'll find the same old cowboys versus Indians trope from the American frontier, repackaged as an alien war. It's as if the grand vision of alien battles can only manifest as a backwater brawl in the American imagination. Religion, too, remains an inescapable undertone in American sci-fi, reflecting a deep-seated cultural quirk. A prime example is Event Horizon, a fascinating yet unsettling film. While visually and thematically captivating, it essentially reimagines the concept of the warp from Warhammer 40K. The black hole is nothing more than a prelude to the warp's chaotic dimensions. The savior complex of the United States is evident in almost every major sci-fi blockbuster of the new millennium. In these films, America is always tasked with saving humanity, while everyone else seems to exist solely to get in the way or simply perish without resistance. The savior, meanwhile, is portrayed as grappling with overwhelming responsibilities. Even some veteran sci-fi directors couldn't hold back their criticism of this trend. For instance, James Cameron, the renowned director of the Terminator and Alien franchises, publicly criticized modern Hollywood directors, claiming their works are akin to the immature, reckless antics of high school graduates at a wild party. He accused them of creating films with illogical plots just to showcase their ignorance and laughably shallow ideas. Yet Cameron isn't entirely blameless either. After all, he directed Avatar 2 and produced Terminator Dark Fate, both of which tarnished the reputation of their original casts and franchises. Before these seasoned directors could finish venting their frustrations, a true nightmare descended upon them, the sweeping tide of political correctness across the United States and the Western world, which has almost nailed the coffin shut for sci-fi films. Prior to this storm, American sci-fi may have been shrinking in scope and losing narrative cohesion, but it still maintained a semblance of normalcy. Themes like humanity's insignificance on a cosmic scale, the inescapability of physical laws, and the mysteries of the future, epitomized by ideas like the dark forest theory, were central to the genre. However, with the advent of political correctness, the landscape became inundated with sentiments such as love powers everything, love saves all, and there is no universe without love. These ideas fundamentally undermine the core of sci-fi's commitment to truth and realism. The profound humanistic and scientific spirit that once defined Western classic sci-fi, along with its thoughtful exploration of humanity's fate and universal truths, has all but vanished. Instead, some individuals have exploited political correctness for personal gain, wreaking havoc on art and culture. As a result, contemporary sci-fi films are increasingly devoid of logical narratives. Instead, they rely on actors' overwrought emotions, exaggerated expressions, and tears. Ridiculous plots, like reviving the dead or rebooting the universe through collective effort, are now rampant. Worse still, the intrusion of capital has dealt a fatal blow to American sci-fi films. Compared to hard sci-fi stories, which appeal to a narrower audience, capital clearly prefers space operas and melodramatic spectacles. These are easier to market, with established production pipelines that guarantee profitability while sparing audiences from the need to think critically. This trend gave rise to the mass production of superhero films, exemplified by Marvel's Iron Man, which became the cornerstone of the Marvel Cinematic Universe. After tasting success, Marvel grew complacent, Soon, superpowers dominated the screen, conveniently glossing over conflicts with science and technology. Everything was hand-waved with superpowers, as if the audience wouldn't notice. This approach is reminiscent of over-the-top scenes from Chinese anti-Japanese war dramas, where soldiers tear enemies apart with their bare hands. Some films, like Madame Web or Joker 2, are so poorly made that they defy description. The outcome is a steady decline in narrative quality. Studios compensate by pouring money into special effects and spectacle, but the bloated budgets fail to disguise the hollow storytelling. Box office returns are increasingly disappointing. Superhero films are a prime example. After an initial period of glory, their popularity has plummeted. Recent releases such as Joker 2, Shazam, Fury of the Gods, The Flash, Blue Beetle and Aquaman and The Lost Kingdom all performed disastrously. Even once legendary franchises like Star Wars haven't been spared. The series has devolved into what feels like a village skirmish, saturated with political correctness, leaving longtime fans lamenting, "This doesn't feel right." What's worse, the failure of these so-called sci-fi films, which are essentially indistinguishable from street brawls, has shaken investors' confidence in the genre. This perpetuates the stereotype that sci-fi films don't make money, further jeopardizing an already struggling genre. Unless something changes, the future of sci-fi films looks bleak, except perhaps for China, which has finally begun to open a window into the genre. Ironically, many of the creators behind this breakthrough, be it Liu Cixin or other Chinese sci-fi writers, grew up inspired by the golden age of Western science fiction. Their works carry the unmistakable flavour of that era, which is why I call them remnants of the golden age. It's telling that even the three-body problem was adapted into a film by Americans, though their version prioritised ideology over extraterrestrial elements. Instead of exploring alien civilizations, it focused on intellectual salons trying to save humanity, rendering it unrecognizable as the three-body problem. The collapse of American sci-fi is utterly baffling, to the point where even abstract Chinese films like The Wandering Earth or Journey to the West, Universe Exploration Editorial Department, feel more coherent by comparison. When I first saw the promotional material for Journey to the West, I thought it was some low-budget indie production, but in hindsight, it's better than Madame Web. Ultimately, films are a vehicle for values. Classics like Terminator 2 authentically captured America's strength in the late 80s and early 90s. Mulan, from 1998, portrayed an individual changing their destiny through hard work. Kung Fu Panda showed how an unlikely hero could rise above their flaws to achieve greatness. In contrast, today's Hollywood gives us Terminator Dark Fate, where after defeating Skynet, we immediately face Legion. In Mulan, the 2020 version, the protagonist relies on Qi, and Kung Fu Panda 4 feels like a movie made to switch your brain off. Frankly, even from my own perspective, it's heartbreaking to see such iconic IPs squandered. These hollow productions are a complete waste of time, and I won't watch any of them again.